Hey everyone, it's Tom Crowder with another Rockstar Minute. And look, does the Bank of Canada even know what it's doing? Take a look at this data. So here's some data going back into TREB's history. And when our parents bought our first family home in Mississauga, it's actually their second home. They bought their first home in Toronto. It was a boarding house that they kept for a little while after they bought our family's home in Mississauga. But they bought that home in 1976. Now look at TREB data. And in 1976, it was $61,000 was the average purchase price of a home in Toronto. Now, if we skip ahead to when they paid off their mortgage in Mississauga on that house, this was about a 3,000 square foot home, 4-bedroom, walkout basement, really, really nice house. They paid it off in 1986 for $138,000. Which is kind of just interesting in itself that you could get a house in 1986 for $138,000 in Mississauga, but they paid off their house. Now, why is the price different between when they bought the house and when they sold and when they paid off the mortgage? Now, the Bank of Canada would explain to us that that's inflation, that that's normal because that's inflation. And they even have this thing called an inflation calculator on their website. And if you look at the inflation calculator, I highlighted a sentence. It says they monitor things, and these things are the consumer price index, and these things include food, shelter, furniture, clothing, transportation, and recreation, and so on. And that's supposed to explain the difference in prices. But the thing is, the calculator does a horrible job. This whole idea of inflation isn't tracking things well at all, because if we take prices and map out house prices in Toronto against Canadian incomes, and I know we've taken Toronto house prices and it's Canadian incomes, not Toronto incomes, but still, look at the difference in income growth since 1969, if we go all the way back to the earliest data we can find in 1969, look at the difference in income growth as compared to house prices. So both are going up, and the Bank of Canada would call that inflation, but clearly things do not go up with inflation at the same rates. And this is the destruction of the middle class that we keep talking about. That over time, people aren't going to be able to afford the houses that they're going to want to live in, and it's destroying the middle class here in Canada. Now take a look at this. The government of Canada, or the Bank of Canada, puts out this thing called the measurement bias. And this measurement bias is this little 2-page PDF. And the bottom left-hand corner, you probably can't see the subtitle, but it says that there's a commodity substitution bias. I've kind of blown up the paragraph at the top right so that we can read it. And they substitute things so that it looks like prices aren't going up as much as they really are. So for example, they have this example here. It says, if the price of beef rises sharply, consumers may buy pork or chicken instead if they are cheaper. Because of this shift in spending patterns, the actual increase in the overall cost of living is less than the increase in the cost of buying the original fixed basket. So what they're basically saying is if the price of beef rises, they just substitute in the price of chicken or pork, whatever's cheaper, when they're coming up there with their basket of goods to measure inflation. But my question back to the Bank of Canada is, what happens if I really want beef? What happens if I want my steak and I don't want my chicken? So you're not accurately measuring anything in my eyes. And that's kind of how we look at it. So now if we go back to this property price in 1986, at $138,000. And if I take that value, $138,925, the amount of the value of the house, or average value of a house in Toronto when our parents paid off our mortgage, and I put that into their inflation calculator, and then I hit calculate, and I see in the year 2017, that house is supposed to only be worth $273,000. But if I skip ahead here, and look at the TREB data in 2017, the average price of a house isn't $273,000, it's $822,000. So this inflation calculator of the Bank of Canada is obviously not doing a very good job in our eyes at all. And to us, this is why we like real estate. It's not because the real estate itself is great. It's just a vehicle that allows us to navigate through the money game the way it works in the best possible way for ourselves and our families. And we'll take all the negatives that come with real estate, dealing with the banks and mortgages and interest rates and watching out for corrections and being short-term paranoid but long-term optimistic, because we need to navigate real estate this way because it's one of the only ways to win the money game, in our opinion anyway. So hopefully you find that useful. Until next time, your life, your terms.